Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Wild from Pro Writing Aid. Thank you for joining me for another of our Ask a Book Doctor series. Tonight is our 17th session. My guest, as always, is our resident book doctor, Sally OJ. How are you doing tonight, Sally?
Doing very well tonight, Tom. Thank you. It's a bit nippy, but it's lovely.
Yeah, yeah. It's well, days start getting lighter in a matter of days. Exactly that. Yeah. So, Sally, tonight we are talking about characterization. It's a subject we have covered in a previous book doctor session, but let's just start with defining or explaining what characterization means for those who might not know.
It's funny you say that we've done it previously. I thought we'd done it really recently, and in fact, turns out it was our second ever book doctor, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
What is characterization? Characterization is making sure you've got full color, living, breathing people walking through your books. I think I once made an analogy about a party when talking about a thriller. And it's what you don't want to do is walk into a room, the room of your book, and find the same person cloned throughout the party, and you've only got this one person. So, some of them look female and some of them look male, but it's basically the same person. So what happens a lot is that people will basically write one character and cut it into five. They all sound the same. It's basically just the same person divided, and that's not what you want. What you want is distinctive, easy. What you ideally want is if you read a page of your book and there are no names on the page, you still know which character it is. Now that sounds as if I'm suggesting, you must give one a Scottish accent and you must give another a catchphrase, and it's not that at all. It's just making sure, and it's not to do with dialogue either, it's partly to do with dialogue. It's just making sure that you know exactly who your characters are as fully rounded people, because quite often authors will focus on the aspect of a character that's pertinent to the story. Right. So, if a person is a fisherman, that's what we're going to get on the page. They're the fisherman. But it's much more interesting if the fisherman, also collects stamps and likes watching Strictly. That's not necessarily going to come out. It's not necessarily going to come out on the page. But if you know that, if you as an author know that, he's going to become a much better rounded character on the page. And this comes down to making character notes.
Right. Okay, which is great, because the first question I've already had is how can I avoid cloning my character in one book or another? So character notes, you explained these to me recently when we spoke, and they make perfect sense. But you also explained that lots of people are quite resistant. Lots of authors are quite resistant.
Very resistant to doing it. A lot of people, they say, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And then I read the next draft and I said, did you do character notes? And they say, yes. And I say, you didn't do character notes. I can tell that you didn't.
Okay, so right at the top then, if there's one takeaway from today's session, it's do your character notes.
Well, I'll explain why. Okay. So character notes are, what I ask people to do usually is start with one page. Tell yourself it's going to be one page. Quite often what happens is it goes on and on and on, but just one page of information about each character, certainly each of your major characters, but even the peripheral ones, even if they're going to have an impact, them as well. And obviously what they look like, how old they are, all the sort of very obvious stuff, but then you can just keep going. You can think, well, what do they like to watch on telly? When's their birthday? I told you I had one author who knew what star sign all of her characters were. It was never mentioned in the book, but it informed the way, because this was something that was her thing. It really informed the way she wrote it. And I have to tell you, they were great. They were very real characters. But just anything you can think of. Do they wear contact lenses? Do they have pets? Are they allergic to anything? What's their favorite food? What do they dislike? Just chuck it all down there. And as you do, this person will start to build up in your mind. They will become more and more real to you. And I've had people say, I started to write about her, and 7 pages later, I was still writing. That's fantastic.
Right. Yeah.
And it does not all have to go in the book. In fact, of course, it's not all going to go in the book, except it is, because you are going to have this extremely well thought out character. And I know why people, or at least I think I know why people don't want to do it. It's like homework. Oh, I've got to sit down and do my character notes.
Yeah.
But anyone who ever has done it has always come back to me and said, it was such a good exercise. And and that's also, what you might find out is that the fisherman didn't originally come from that small village in Cornwall. He actually originally came from Manchester, and that's going to inform him as well. I mean, that's a bit of an extreme example, but dialogue is a good way of defining your characters. And of course, I don't want, we don't want somebody with a very thick Scottish brogue and somebody with but what you can get in, if somebody is from Scotland, for example, or if somebody is from Manchester, or if somebody is from Devon, there are nuances to the way they speak, not the accent exactly, but you can have. I mean, I was watching, I don't know why, well, because it was funny. I was watching a bit of this comedian called Sarah Millican earlier. I was having a cup of tea and I was watching Sarah Millican.
Yes.
And she's from the northeast of England, and she kept calling people flower, which is a very, you're in the northeast when somebody's calling you flower. And it can just be little things like that. You don't have to keep trying to sort of get the whole accent in. That would be very hard on the reader. Or you can just give somebody, as I said to you, I've got this speaking tic, which you all must be aware of, which is I say all the time.
Yeah.
You'll be very aware of it tonight now I've said it. And it's something I've tried to stop and I can't stop. I don't hear myself doing it, but you can have, you can give one character something like that. Yeah. Not more than that, because it would get very wearing. So any way that you can find to tease them apart and make them different and make them unique, that's the key. That's what you want them to be. You want each character to be unique. Yeah. And
that's the point about the cloning, right? Is when you don't do that depth of kind of not research, but planning, if you like, then you end up with, even subconsciously, you end up with a clone of multiple.
You do. I mean, I have a lot of authors will say to me, I don't need to do this, because they are absolutely vivid to me as individuals in my head. It's as if I've been living with them for years. I know exactly what they're like. I know, I sit and watch Strictly with some of them, so that's fine. If that's how you perceive them in your head as absolutely individual, that's wonderful. But then make sure they come across like that on the page.
I was going to say, as we know, perceiving what's in your head is going to be very different to what's
always a very different thing. So that's the first step towards getting good characters.
Okay, and I just want to go back, because I imagine, and I can see some questions already about this, but the point is you're not making these notes because all these details are going to be added to the story. No, it's more for your own benefit, so you can picture this character.
That's right. Sorry to interrupt, but I still will. Some of the things will actually possibly creep in. If you decide that their birthday is January the 5th, that might somehow creep into the story. Or, if you decide that they love mudlarking on the Thames, for those of you not familiar with this, it's going down to the low tide on the Thames. You go down onto the mud banks of the Thames and you find all sorts of amazing stuff. Clay pipes mostly, but all sorts of amazing stuff. So they could be having a conversation. They could arrange to meet somebody while they're mudlarking or something. These kind of things can just jazz things up a bit, make things a bit different, move things around a bit. You don't want it all to, you certainly don't want it all to go in, and you don't want it to sort of take over the story, but just to flesh people out, round them out, give them, you know, give them a nice splash of color and a sort of zing of their own. That's what you're after.
Yeah, and in fact, you picked up GB Ralph in chat has just said, I've heard someone call it each character's flash of color. Maybe that was on a previous Book Doctor session. Yeah.
Well, obviously, splash is much more. No, that's really great. That's fantastic.
I think the inference might be that may even be something you said before, Sal. But yeah, it's a splash or a splash of color. But and Patricia, as posed a question, say, how do you use this information within the story? But it's not essential. This is not.
No, I don't. Very specifically, I'm not suggesting you use the information within the story. What I'm suggesting is that you, as you're writing this all down, get to know your character really well, and that will find its way into the story. So the more well-rounded the character is, it may never occur to you before that they use contact lenses. So when they wake up in the morning, they need to, you know, feel around on their bedside cabinet for their glasses before they get up, and before, you know, it may never have occurred to you that they are allergic to poppies or you know, all of these things, and it will find its way in the book even if you never mention it, I promise you, because they become much more three-dimensional.
Now that's an interesting point, Sal, because it becomes, I think you've mentioned this before about it being a light touch, you know, how you actually introduce these elements into a book. So how do you get the balance? How do you know that your touch is right in that respect? I can understand from your perspective, you know, as an editor, as a book doctor, you can probably have a very finely tuned sense of where someone is, you know, not revealing too much, but they're dumping everything onto the page about the character notes for that character.
Yeah, I mean, it is just doing it with a light touch. You don't want to, we're back to condiments again, aren't we? You don't want to cover all your food in tomato sauce. You just want a little bit on the side. It's the reason I encourage people to do this is so that they really get to understand their characters.
Yeah.
And you know, write about their childhood, right? How many brothers and sisters have they got? Do they get on with their parents? Did they break their arm when they fell out of the tree? None of this is going to get into the book, but it is what I'm saying. I think, actually, I believe somebody, I could be lying, but I think you might go, if you go online, there might be guides to doing this, which I am a bit wary of, because I'd rather it all came out of your head. But I think, I mean, I made a checklist once, a very detailed checklist to give to an author that I was working with. You know, does she do this? Has she got that? Did she have a dog when she was a child? Very, very detailed. And actually, it didn't help her at all.
Right.
It was a mistake. Much better to just sit down and think, right, okay, Gary's standing in front of me. What, you know, tell me about yourself, Gary. You know, just let it all come out like that. But I think you can find sort of guides or templates. I think.
It's a fascinating process. I often think when I read a book with what I think of as quite a complex character or an interesting character, I wonder how the author came up with that person, came up with the richness of characters. You know what I mean? Can we talk just
very quickly? Sorry, Tom. Something we haven't talked about, and of course, something that's really common is very often characters are based on somebody that the author knows.
Yes.
And that's okay as long as it's done very discreetly. But if you think, I often say to people, it's not exactly fan fiction, but if somebody's getting stuck with a particular character, I say, well, you know, choose somebody off the telly, or choose somebody that you saw in a film as a starting point.
Yes.
You know, just think about how they move, just think about how they walk, just think about what, you know, how they talk, you know, that use everything out there, just pull it all out. I saw something pop out. It's gone again now. I don't usually see things in chat. Or It's gone again. It's just gone. I don't know what it was. It's popped up and now it's gone.
It might be. It depends. Yeah, don't worry about that. So
okay. I turn it off because it distracts me otherwise.
But you mentioned kind of dialogue and how this comes through in dialogue, and one of the things can be kind of through accents and colloquialisms, and in fact, your story about Sarah Millican reminded me of when I used to go to Glasgow quite frequently and be referred to as N, which is a great term.
N, exactly. Yeah.
But so one of the questions is about colloquialisms. Actually, do you know of an authoritative source of many regional colloquialisms that we could refer to when writing characters?
I don't, and I would suggest it's the same as what I just said. I would be a bit wary of that because these things change a lot for a start, and it's better if you know somebody from that place, or if again on telly. If it's a current TV series and there's somebody from the Northeast and they're calling everyone Flower, then you're on pretty safe ground. If you're watching EastEnders, you've got a pretty safe idea about what people talk like in the East. It actually is quite good.
Yeah.
Very good, in fact, for what people talk like in the East End. So, I mean, but unless you know somebody or have, I used an example when I was talking to you before the other day, and I showed you something, didn't I? And it was very good. Somebody writing somebody with a Scottish, who was Scottish, but she's married to somebody who's Scottish, so she could just get it down absolutely perfectly. I would be wary of taking examples because some things can go out of date quite quickly, but also. They're just not always right.
Failing that, find communities like ours and ask people within those communities. So Cal Writer 2, you asked about British, Canadian and American jargon and verbal crutches. I'm sure if you put some questions in chat, you'll probably get some help from other people on today's call. So I'd certainly try that. Okay, so there are an enormous number of questions already mounting up, and one that's caught my eye is from Jim. He's a regular contributor, and Jim said, Jim Bessie, can you talk a bit about Mary Sue characters? I've seen some confusion about this lately.
We were talking about this, Tom, weren't we, the other day? Often not always, sometimes when you've got the clones, when your book is just full of clones. It's like a bad episode of Doctor Who. And that's when the writer is writing a Mary Sue. And I'm sure everyone here knows what a Mary Sue is, but just in case, it's basically when you write yourself. You write yourself as a character, or you are that character. It can be a bit blurry, but it's basically you on the page. And it's always, I mean, there's a benefit because you sure know that character really well and all their tics and habits and history and everything. So that's a plus. But it's a sort of slightly, I can't probably, but I always feel I can tell when somebody's done it.
Okay. Interesting. So a couple of people in chat are saying that they thought it was around characters who are perfect characters without flaws.
Mary Sue. Yeah, this is the trouble there. I know I believe it started out what I just said. If someone's a Mary Sue, that's you're putting yourself into the story. I think now there are several different meanings of it, which can be quite confusing. But I've always stuck with the one that I first heard of. I first heard about it actually when I had my summer of researching fan fiction. That's when I first heard about it, and that's definitely what it meant in fan fiction. Okay. So just taking it as what I thought it meant, it's a risky business to and it's strange because you wouldn't think it happens that often, but it does happen quite a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
It does happen quite a lot.
let's dive into some other questions.
Can I just add, it very often happens when men are writing, it's like directors, you know, old directors who cast themselves
I can imagine it.
Playing against beautiful young women, you know, and it happens a lot when men. I have not yet had it the other way around, but I'm sure it exists. But when men are writing sort of romance, it's very often their character creeps in there. I have noticed.
Yeah.
And in one sense, why not? But in another sense, it's got to be good if you're going to do that.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification. Let's move on to a couple of questions. So one person said, I'm not very visual. My characters do have other characteristics, what they like, dislike, sport, what books are like, sex, etc. But I don't always describe appearance sometimes. You wouldn't know if the character has dark or light hair, for example. Is that important?
Who is the name of the person who asked this question?
So it's E. Henisto.
Darn, that's a bit difficult for me to say. E. Henisto. Thank you so much for asking this question, because it is very important. And it's something else that I tend to butt heads with authors about sometimes. Here's the thing. I say, I'm on page 100 of your book and I don't know what your main character looks like. And they say, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because the reader's just going to make it up anyway. I could write what I like, and the reader's just going to picture who they picture. This is true. But it does matter, and I shall tell you why. If you tell us on page 2 or 1 or 3, when we first meet the character, basically, very soon after we meet the character, if you just mention, you know, she swept her blonde hair out of her, you know, you can do it subtly. You don't have to say Rob, 5'3", bald, fat, walked into the room. You know, I don't know why I always do this awful accent. I'm so sorry. It's not even an accent. It's just a strange thing. Anyway, you don't have to do that, but you can give us a lot of information. You know, he ducked as he came through the door. You can give us a lot of information. And so you can tell us very clearly that Rob is 6'2", he's blonde, he's got blue eyes, and he talks with a Scottish accent. The reader will immediately picture Woody Allen and will continue to picture Woody Allen throughout the book for reasons of their own, for whatever reason. But the point is, when they get to page 156 and suddenly Rob's height or blue eyes or fair hair is important, the reader's it's not going to be like that needle scratching off a record, because the reader did know that Woody Allen was actually 6'2". They knew that. It's just they've chosen to go with that. So when they're suddenly confronted with some aspect of their how they look, it's not going to be a shock or a confusion to them. They'll just gloss over it, but it's not going to throw them. They're not going to say, oh my God, all this time I've been, you know, picturing him as having red hair and a beard. So if you just give the reader just little clues onto what your characters look like, it's actually very, very helpful. They may well reject it. Not everybody does, I don't think. I think people often will go, if you say someone's short and dark and with curly hair, they'll go with it. I think everyone should be short and dark with curly hair myself. That's just my own opinion. But whether or not people will picture their own character, it's important to give them the clues, because otherwise they have this shock. And there's another good reason to describe how people look, and that is what I call, Sally OJ patented thing here, sonic beeps. So if you introduce a character briefly at the beginning of the book, and it turns out that they're going to be important to the plot in the middle of the story, however well you introduce them, if you have one character literally saying to another, this is my cousin Jane, she's come in from Ohio, she's staying with us for a few days. Jane, would you like something to drink? Yes, I'd like, you know, even if you've got a little scene with Jane, if she then disappears completely until page 156, when Jane suddenly says, hi, I'm back, your reader's going to go, who's that? So what you want is some kind of sonic beep back to that person, So if Jane with her, I'm going very cliched here now, curly red hair, Jane with her wooden leg, Jane with her hawk that she always has on her shoulder, Jane with her scar, the shape of a parrot on her face, all of these things, or perhaps something much more subtle than that. If you've got some kind of defining characteristic of the person, which can often be hair, it can often be facial hair. A moustache on a woman is always a very good way of remembering her. It can be height, it can be, you know, girth, just something to let the reader know, oh yes, I remember her, I remember him. It can be very, very gently done, or clothing even, you know, a certain kind of a scarf or shoes or something. Just something, a little sonic beat that takes you back to that moment when you first met them. There.
I love that. And I love the fact that Barb in chat has asked if Jane is a pirate.
Well, obviously.
Yeah.
Goes without saying, just a slightly confused pirate because she didn't get the parrot. She's got a bird of brains.
And Eva, thank you for confirming your name. I hope that helped.
Oh, thank you, Eva. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. And I also think there's some points you've made there that are relevant to some of the other questions that are appearing as well. So Sammy asks, what options are there for providing readers with closure for peripheral characters? So my story revolves around two main characters in a romance. Will readers want to know how the story ends for all of the characters who appear in the story?
Only if you put them in jeopardy or something like that. Yeah. If they're ticking along quite nicely, they tick along nicely, they roll into your story, they roll out, then it's fine. I mean, people worry terribly about pets. You know, if the dog's got lost, they can't relax in a book until the dog's been found again, one way or another. You know, people, what if you leave Jack, your peripheral character Jack, and he's been hurt, subconsciously at least people will desperately want to know what, well, desperately is a bit strong. So if you leave them in some kind of jeopardy or some kind of cliffhanger or some kind of, with a question to be answered, basically, that, you know, we've talked about Chekhov's gun before.
Yeah.
It's a kind of Chekhov's gun. All you people know about Chekhov's gun. Chekhov said, if you hang a gun on the wall in the first chapter, or first act of a play, then it has to go off by the third. And you don't want to leave your reader waiting for the other shoe to drop. So as long as your peripheral characters have just, you know, said goodbye and gone home, yeah, you're fine.
Great, thank you, Sal. Next question. I'm working on cutting down my manuscripts. Should I include short flashbacks for the love interest of my main character to give them characterization?
Without seeing it, it's very difficult to say, but sure. Yeah. It just has to be, you know, it's like every single thing we talk about, it just has to be done well. It just has to work. And flashbacks can be so helpful.
Yeah.
But you have to structure it. It's a tricky structure, actually. And you have to get it right. And you have to make an awful lot clear. And I really strongly recommend, if you're going to have a flashback, unless you're a real master at the art, and that goes, I use that as a asexual term, just put, you know, California 1965 at the top of the flashback.
It's clear. Yeah.
Just make it clear. Just help your reader. You know, it's they'll only notice it subconsciously, probably, or quite often people don't even notice it, and then they suddenly think, where am I? And then they'll go back and look. Oh, it's 1965 now. Just make it easy for them. It's not, you know, people sometimes say, oh, that's cheating. That's, you know, that's lazy writing. It's not lazy writing. Just help the reader. Just guide them.
Yeah.
That's
okay. Thanks. So Sal, sorry, I'm quickly scrolling through them because as quick as we answer them, more appear, which is great. I'm just hoping, well, let's get a move on anyway. So this is an interesting one. Struggling for more than a year with a paranormal romance novel. the MMC, is that male main character? The MMC is developing very well. The FMC is stuck and I can't seem to get a handle on her. Have made endless GMC notes, written, rewritten, and she still refuses to come to life. What questions should I be asking of her to discover what's blocking her?
Well, the first thing I would say is if it's been this hard, maybe she's not, maybe you should try a different character, which I know it sounds really, really difficult, but I have worked on a book where I have said to somebody, you just need to, you know, he has to go and somebody else has to come instead, and it worked really well. If you don't want to do that, and I understand if you don't, what you've got to ask questions of is yourself, not your character first. What does this character represent to you? Why have you chosen her? What does she mean in terms of the plot to you? What are you trying to say to the reader with her? What does she bring to the story that is unique to her? These are the questions you have to ask yourself. If you are clear about all those things, then you should be clear about why it's not working. And if you're clear about why it's not working, you should be able to during that process, you should be able to work out what's going on. But I would talk to somebody else about it. You know, I think you all know, you're part of a writing community, how helpful it is.
Yeah.
You also know how sick your spouse is and the significant others get of you talking about your book and talking about your characters, and your friends hate it and everybody hates it. And it's, you know, it's actually a really hard thing about being a writer.
Yeah. Is
that especially significant others tend to not be very supportive often, or, you know, they can be fantastic, but it can be something that it can be quite a difficult thing. But if you can find somebody to say, look, here's a bottle of wine that I have bought for you. I need to talk to you about this character, and let them ask some questions that you have to answer about the character. That'll crack it open in an hour.
Yeah,
it will. If you sit down with somebody else, explain briefly the situation. Don't over explain. Please don't over explain. Just say, you know, she's the main character. This is what you know, it's just not working. Let's talk about her for a bit. Let them ask you questions. Don't say that's a stupid question, or don't say that's ridiculous. Just answer whatever they ask. I pretty much guarantee you that will solve it. But ask yourself those questions first, because that is really going to, I imagine that will help tremendously.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
And let us know if it works.
And I think there's a degree of agreement as well. Fit Doggy has just mentioned, yes, hubby is sick of my questions. So yeah.
It's actually something that people don't talk about. A lot of authors hurt terribly because the people that they care about don't care about their writing, and think it's silly, and think it's a waste of time, and think they're never going to get published, and think it's not very good, or all these things. And it's terribly wounding. It's really, really hard. It's like somebody not liking your child.
Yeah.
And it also is not taking something seriously that you take terribly seriously. And it's not something I think that writers talk about enough. I think it can be really problematic. And if you have got a spouse who is supportive, or have got a best friend who is supportive, you are so lucky. You are so lucky, and treasure them.
Yeah. Buy them lots of wine.
Buy them loads of wine.
Nina asked, in the very beginning of the book, the first pages, how can I best reveal the characterization of my protagonist to create empathy?
Can you ask that again, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've just closed. Oh yeah, in the very beginning of the book, how can I best reveal the characterization of my protagonist to create empathy?
I don't know how to answer that, because it's and I don't mean this in a mean way. I really don't mean, but it's literally what we've just been talking about. You know, an empathetic character you and I talked about this, Tom. You know, it's sometimes people deliberate. Sorry, I'm going off track with your question, and I will come back to it.
That's okay.
But sometimes people want to create a dislikable protagonist, and that's really playing with fire. It's a good idea, but there's got to be something for your reader to read to them. There's got to be something, even if they're awful narcissistic people. You've either got to be holding on, waiting for them to get it, or there's got to be, you've got to think, oh, but he's so charming, or, you know, whatever. To make your character empathetic, you've got me, you've absolutely stumped me, because it's just what we've been talking about. So let's think of somebody you know who you would describe as an empathetic person. What is it about them? It's their warmth. It's the way they listen. It's the way they smile when you talk to them. It's the fact that they don't hog all the attention in the room, but bring a kind of kindness with them. You know, these are the things. So
yeah.
If you're wanting to create an empathetic character, think about the most empathetic person you know and see if you can bring them to life on the page a little bit. I'm sorry, that's not a very good answer.
No, I think it is. And I think it links to how we talked about, you know, using dialogue to enhance characterization. So, but immediately when you start talking about that, I always think of an empathetic person as someone who's a good listener.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a starting point. So I think that is a hopefully useful answer.
If I didn't say it, I meant to.
You did.
Yeah.
I just steal all your ideas and
have them, take them.
Okay, let's moving on. So we've covered dialogue. How do I add character details without interrupting the flow of the story? How do I get good
dialogue tags?
There we go.
Dialogue tags are what I always call signifiers. So obviously you don't want to go mad with this, and it doesn't have to be dialogue tags. You can do it, you know, I mean, at the beginning of a scene, you can often put some characteristics in, but God, I'm going to have to make things up, and it's going to get weird. It always gets weird, but you know, thanks, said Susan, as she, you know, I used this example of sweeping their blonde hair out, you know, or her, never ever use this, but her blue eyes twinkling, or, you know, as he folded his 6'3" frame into the chair, or so, you know, those are great places to get to, to just remind your reader as well of what your characters look like or sound like or whatever. So they're very good places, but also, you know, as just throughout the narrative, you should be able to slide things in there every now and then, and it only needs to be every now and then. But you want your book to come to life on the page, so it's. But again, you don't know every sentence mustn't be about somebody's sparkling green eyes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Sal. Sorry, I don't know if you heard a plaintive cat meow in the background halfway through that answer. Anyway, possibly not. My cat's waiting to be let out, I think. We still have a ton of questions to go through, which is great. I love this. How do you make your, so we've kind of covered this. How do you make your characters flawed without making them so unlikable that readers will be turned off? Is there a line one shouldn't cross?
You want your characters to be flawed. Here's another Sally OJ patented thing that I use a lot to explain it. You want some grit in your oyster, or you're not going to get a pearl. I like that. I'm very proud of that one. So your characters, I once worked on a book, and it was a book that was based loosely on sort of his family history, and he was obviously didn't want to make any of his ancestors, even though it was like hundreds of years ago, he obviously didn't want to make any of his ancestors unlikable, and they were all so nice and so good and so noble, and God, it was just nauseating. And you know, it was too much. You want your characters to be a bit flawed. You want your characters to be a bit grumpy. Funnily enough, I was reading a book. I was working on a book quite recently, about a year ago, where one of the main characters, I'm pretty sure he had based it on a character in a TV show, because this character was very likable, but had exactly the same sort of flaws as this. It was quite sulky and stuff. I can't really explain. I just thought, I know where you've got this character from. So, and this of course is the opposite of what you're asking. I understand that. So if you've got an unpleasant character, you do the reverse. You give them some nice characteristics, by which I don't mean, and we were talking about this, and I don't mean Hitler liked animals. I don't mean that kind of thing. I mean, you very, very rarely get a person who doesn't have some kind of redeeming feature, even if it's just that they're nice to their mother, or that they give the homeless guy on the corner some money when they go past, or, that's all cliche. Try and push yourself to do something better. And also remember that horrible, horrible people are usually horrible people for a reason. And you don't necessarily want to put that in the book. You don't necessarily want to say it's because their daddy didn't love them, or it's because, they were bullied at school or whatever. But people rarely are born horrible.
Yeah.
Seriously. There's usually a reason for it, which means there will be some kind of glimmer of the better person in there. So just see if you can find that every now and then. It makes it much more interesting. And also, don't write villains. I don't write villain as, sort of sneering and scar-faced and greasy haired. Some of the most horrible people in the world are beautiful.
Yeah.
You see, look, I keep saying, there you go.
So when we touched on the other day about kind of historical references. So, describing characters in a story in the 1930s, and maybe describing where I'm going with this. But someone's posted a question about how much do you write language and words in the time period you are writing in? So but not to confuse or lose the reader. Basically.
I'm happy to revisit this, as long as other people don't mind, because we did talk about it quite recently. But it's people don't want you to write exactly as people spoke in the 1930s. That's already quite archaic. That would already sound quite odd. What they want you to write is how they think people spoke in the 1930s. So they want a few, I says, and they want a few, jolly good old chap, and they want a few, that's wizard. That's the kind of stuff they want a bit of, hopefully done much more subtly and better than that. They really don't want it, because, people spoke very differently, even in the 30s. If you want to be very accurate, you can watch films that were made at the time, if it's possible. Obviously, you want a certain point, you can't go back that far. Books that were written at that time. But nobody wants to read a book now that's written like Great Expectations. They don't. What they want is to read what they think that time period would sound like. And, all the great historical novelists do this. Hilary Mantel is an excellent example. Mary Renault, who I always talk about, is an excellent example. Sarah Waters is an excellent example when she writes historical stuff. It's not at all how people spoke, but it is exactly how we think they spoke. And that's what you want to aim for.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, I think we've got time probably for one more question. And so there are going to be a few I'm not going to be able to get to tonight. I'm very sorry about that, but we are just running out of time. So Tara asked, my protagonist grows up over the course of the book. Any suggestions on continuing to drop in the physical changes as they grow?
Only what sorry to shortchange you, Tara, I don't mean to do that, but only what I've already said. The thing is, if somebody's got, think about a kid you haven't seen. Think about a 15-year-old kid that you haven't seen for a year. The first thing you're going to say is, my God, you've grown. That's the first thing you say. And then you apologize and say, I'm sorry, everyone must say that to you. Or, wow, you've turned into such a handsome. So have the other characters, but do it with a light touch always. Have the other characters do the describing for you. Do it through response, do it through reaction. and do it through, you know, him putting on a sweater that he looked great on in the last chapter, but now it's halfway up his arms. You know, you can, it's I mean, there's all the obvious stuff if it's a boy, like with voices getting deeper and obviously figures changing and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, some you can't have everyone they meet exclaiming on how different they look, but that's a good way of doing it. And yeah, and think about things like, okay, don't marry Sue, but think about yourself when you were growing up. You know, think about your trousers creeping up your legs. Think about your shoes, you know,
getting tight.
Yes. All these kind of things.
So that's wonderful. I've actually made a note of all the questions we haven't been able to get to tonight. Perhaps you and I can go through them tomorrow at some point and just look at things that we can weave into some of the start of the next session, maybe that we cover.
Have we not got time for one more?
Well, at what time? No, actually, if you're okay, then I'm okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So,
yes to what you just said, by the way.
Well, so there's an interesting one here, but it's actually related to kind of dialogue tags. So picking up on something you mentioned. So Fiddlesticks, great name. I'm having trouble with conversation of 3 or more characters where I feel like I'm using an insane amount of dialogue tags. Any quick tips for large group conversations?
Yeah, that is a difficult one. The main thing you want to focus on actually is clarity. If you've got more than 2 people, in fact, even if you've got 2 people speaking, you really need to focus on clarity. You want to make sure that your reader knows who is speaking the whole time. So that's your challenge, really.
Yeah.
Dialogue tags, yes, of course. So if it's 3 people and it's a long tract of dialogue, you can't do, excuse me, I'm so sorry. You can get away with, if you look at books that you love, and this is what I always say, look and see how your favorite author does it. You can actually, if the characters are written well, you should be able to just have dialogue. You should be able to know who's talking. Dialogue tag, dialogue tag. The most important thing is that the reader knows who's talking and who's saying what. So that's the thing you've kind of got to focus on. I understand it's great that you've recognized that. That's really, you know, nearly all of the battle won. Again, if you can show it to somebody and ask if it's clear, ask if it's too much, you know, they might say, because the thing is, when you start looking at a passage of your own writing, you know this, it slowly turns into a language you've never ever seen before in your life. And you've got no idea what it says, and you've got no idea what's going on. It just becomes, you know, the words start standing up and walking around on the page on their own. It's just impossible. So if you can get a sort of fact check from somebody, that would be helpful. But the thing to focus on is clarity. That's the most important thing. Do your dialogue tags add anything? If not, bin them.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Thank you so much, Sally. There are some lovely comments coming in. Dalady7, so delightfully absorbed in Sally, did not realise time went by.
It's a while since somebody's been delightfully absorbed in me. But I am very absorbent.
Barb's asked if we can writing a series. I love these ideas. We're certainly going to continue doing what we do, and we'll discuss other ideas as well. But I'd just like to say thank you back to everyone out there, because without you, this is nothing. Without your questions, and I always feel I learn so much in these sessions. So thank you to you, Sally.
Oh, well, thank you. And also to the person who said that was lovely. I know I made a joke, but that's such a nice thing to say. Thank you. And I can't see anything that's coming up, but thank you all so much. This wouldn't work without any of you. So
I will share. I will share all this with you tomorrow, Sally, because I have copies of the chat transcript, which is lovely. Before we go, I'd just like to wish everyone a wonderful holiday season and say that we're really looking forward to seeing you all in January, so in 2022.
Absolutely. Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you so much for supporting us throughout this year. We've really enjoyed it. Have a safe month ahead, and we will see you again in January. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.